Yo, today I'm showing you how I made these 6 bass lines in these high energy, high octane tech house tracks. They're all made completely differently, so let's get weird, let's get wild, and let's get creative. Let's go.
Diamond chain looking like Ice Age. Yeah.
Welcome back to another tutorial, and today we're talking about my favorite thing ever, bass lines. People request this all the time. People are always asking, how do we write exciting, fun, high energy bass lines? Okay, before we dive into it, I would love it if you could smash the subscribe, because I'm just out here just slinging knowledge for fun. And yeah, I'm going to keep doing it. So hopefully come along for the ride and hopefully we learn something fun. Okay, so first up is the rolling bass line. I think this is probably the simplest, but very effective. It's been around, forever. Think of songs like John Summit's Make Me Feel and maybe some like older Fisher stuff. It's the rolly bass line. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. That this is actually a project that I'm currently working on, so you're getting a little sneak peek. So with rolling bass lines, there's two things you want to think about, right? So the note that's happening there is sustained really long. It's going for as long as the MIDI note is happening. And so in the patch that you're using, you're going to want to make sure that it's not something like this. If this would be a really kind of, each note kind of a little more defined, you want to make sure that your sustain is up and that, the whole note is being played. That's how you're going to kind of get some of those rolling sounds. The other characteristic of a rolling bass line or a patch that you might want to find, or maybe you open up and you want to kind of tweak something in there, is turning on the portamento. That's the glide. If I turn this up a lot, you'll hear it really glide along. But if you have it just a little bit, you can have it glide in between those notes versus really tight and have it glide in there. So that's something else. And then usually we want to make sure that it's mono, meaning that you can't play two notes at the same time. Because if you played two of these notes at the same time, it would sound like ass. It would just be a muddy mess because the sound already is already pretty chunky. Usually with a rolling bass line, I find you don't really need to have like a separate sub than your bass. The cleaner sounds are usually going to come from one sound, and then if you want to add like maybe a texture layer on top, you can do that, but have sort of the mid-range and the sub all kind of bulked into one. I find you don't really need to separate those two very often. I used to do that. It was something that I learned in, writing dubstep and bass music, that, you can have all these crazy high-end mid-range stuff and then just have a clean sub below it, and that can work. And I encourage you to try that if you want to, because it'll yield some very creative results. You can kind of do anything you want in the mid-range, and then if you have a clean sub, it'll still like feel like it's a tone. But in the type of music that I write and kind of tech house and techno and stuff, usually the less you have going on down there usually leads to a cleaner result. So then once I have a bass line that I like, I will duplicate it, and I'll take this, Command J, make it all one clip, and I will delete the MIDI. And now we're going to write some whole new MIDI, something completely new, something completely fresh. And because we're in F, we're going to select the scale F minor here, and I'm just going to kind of play around with these purple notes. The simpler, the better. The simpler the bass line, the better for sure with these rolling ones. Let's just write this pretty quickly, because again, simple is all you need. And maybe just a couple. Maybe even just taking this. Yeah. And let's listen to that with the drums. And then maybe on these last two bars, we like switch up these notes and create a little turnaround moment. Cool. That sounds cool. Let's do it again. Duplicate. And maybe this time, instead of it being as basic, we're going to try and make it a little more complicated. And maybe a little more kind of different types of notes in here. Again, I'm going to kind of just try and ride on this F. Where are we? But maybe this time we'll have some shorter. Maybe this one could be a little longer. And again, maybe I want to have like some sort of switch up in here. Maybe instead of it being the last one, maybe this one is a little different. I like to have like something in there that's just a little different, keeps things interesting. It doesn't even need to be that crazy. Maybe even G, just like the second last note. So that is some fun ways to kind of work with a rolling bass line. Now, maybe we want to take this rolling bass line and make it a little like choppier. Instead of it being just rolling all around, maybe let's take it and make it choppier. So we could do that in a few different ways. One way could be even just using a utility and going in and automating the gain on a utility. And you can just take this, and let's say we're doing 16th notes, and we want every 16th note to kind of like chop in a little bit. Like I'm going to put little markers every 16th note, and I'm just going to drag this down, drag that down. Okay, and maybe I want to have it like that. And so you can hold Option to create that curve. Hold Option and then click and drag, and that'll make that curve. And if we want to zoom in, actually, we could even move this one over, hold Option here, and now we kind of have a bit of like a round spike. And if I want, I can highlight that whole section and then just duplicate it. If we're in automation mode, I can even copy and paste automation like that. Automation in Ableton, I love it because there's so many possibilities. And now we have this, I can go and duplicate this automation all the way across. Look at, they kind of look like tits, don't they? Wow. Okay, that's sounding kind of cool. It's a little percussive. And actually, maybe I can go like this and move it up. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. That's a technique that you can do with any sample, sound, patch, synth, anything, right? It doesn't matter what you're using because it's just a utility, right? You could do the same thing in Serum here by mapping an LFO to the level of each oscillator and then kind of bringing this down and now it's basically this LFO is controlling each of those, which is kind of creating that gating effect as well, which is kind of creating like a fun little hype groove of sorts. So we got the rolling bass line. We kind of have a gated, choppy bass line. Let's talk about the bass line in my track, Hit the Dance Floor. I have a really short, sort of 16th note, dugga type bass line, and it sounds like this. So this one, if we look at the MIDI in this one, we are dealing with a bunch of 16th notes. Do, right? It's all 16th notes with a couple 8th notes scattered in there, right? And so it's really fast. And because it's really fast, I needed a sound that was almost plucky and percussive, right? If I had a chunky or whoop rolling sound like we had in the last example, it wouldn't work. In this case, I used a Moog Model D sample. There's like tons of packs out here. This one just happens to come from Cymatics, but there's a bunch out there that actually just sample analog gear, and that is a major pro tip. I talk about this all the time. If you want to, have the sounds of analog gear, but you don't have analog gear, you can buy sample packs that sample analog gear. It's that easy. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars. That's, major pro tip right there. So this one is like a Moog Model D1. If I go in here, you can. Where are we? A bunch of them. I think that's the one. Fisher Donk. But anyways, I thought it was just a nice warm sound. All of these kind of sound great. Wow, that one's sick. Anyways, this one, 16th note. It is a really, really short sound, and I think I'm actually playing this. This is in C. I think I'm playing it in C. Which is it's going to sound nice and perfect right there. And then, a little bit of EQ work, a little bit of Saturn doing its clean tape, just adding a little bit of warmth to it. And then I have some more EQing, OTT, which on my latest version here doesn't even work. Then I have the Soundtoys Psy EQ, which I'm just, what am I even doing here? Just driving it a little bit. That's all I'm doing. Literally, did you know on these Soundtoys plugins, you can actually click these and see what you're doing. So I'm actually just driving the lows slightly and driving it slightly, which is just going to add a little bit of warmth. That's about it. Camel Fat also doesn't work on my latest OS, but it's also just adding some warmth. So that is a really tight type bass line. And that is how, I got this one. Major caveat to all of this. Your bass line needs to match your kick drum. So as much as I'm going to be talking about bass lines today, half of your problems are going to be coming from your kick drum and your sidechain. So, make sure that you have that sidechain. Make sure that you have a kick drum. I explain it all in my track breakdown of Up All Night. I think I'll leave a link right here. But if you have any questions on how to get your kick working, watch that one. But this one, we're talking about bass lines. Okay, so that's Hit the Dance Floor. Short, percussive type bass line. Lots of 16th notes. Something else to note quickly before we move on is it does have some swing on it, right? Because we're having a bunch of 16th notes, it has some swing on it, and that is the same swing settings that we're going to lock kind of the whole song into. Anything that we're kind of swinging, anything that we're moving on our 16th notes, I'm going to lock my whole song on that. You can actually check out my video about how I write high energy drums here, and I talk about swing in that and how to lock your drums in swing, and you should do the same thing with your bass lines. Make sure your bass lines are swung the same way as your drums. Make sure your leads are swung the same way. Lock all that shit in there. All right. Okay, let's move on. All right, the next bass line I want to talk about is like a full range bass line. A good example is my track with Slatin called Killin' Me. It sounds like this. Hilariously, I, in my quick search, didn't actually find the whole project. I found like my first iteration whip. So I think this is what I sent to Slatin, and then he took it. But this bass line takes up the whole range. It takes up the mid range. It takes up the high end. It's like it does the job of a bass line and a lead. It is kind of the whole song. It's really the only thing in the track. Without it, it's just a stab and a vocal and some drums. That's it. So it's the whole thing. There's a lot going on with this one, so let's take a look. First off, I'm going to unfreeze it and explain that there is two layers here. We have this layer, which is kind of our sub layer, and then we have this one. And this one is a bit more of our mid-range layer. This one, they are separated. Because this kind of mid-range layer, if I open this up and we take a listen, I felt like that sub down there wasn't as strong as I wanted it to. And so by adding this other cleaner sub below it, I got a much warmer subtone. So it's things like that you can do. You can layer things, just don't layer them directly on top of each other. If I'm going to layer that, I'm going to roll this one off. I'm just going to use the sub of this one. So this patch itself is actually Diva. Let's look at the MIDI really quickly too. The MIDI is pretty simple. It repeats and then it repeats, but I'm just kind of like rocking back and forth between octaves, I think, right? I'm pretty sure, yeah. That's just between the F sharps, and there's a couple little accents here and there. But for the most part, I'm just rocking on that root note as much as I can. This pattern, yeah, pretty simple. And again, it has my same swing settings as the rest of my track. Make sure everything is all locked in. Let's take a listen. Just. So with this one, I have it automating. So this patch is Diva. I again probably would have just started with a preset, but what I'm modifying on this one is the cutoff time, right? And I'm doing this on so many of my patches, so many of my tracks, is so much automation. In this case, I'm automating the cutoff, and spot these patterns. This is like a little opening here, and then back closed. And it's going to open up even more here because this is like a fill section. So it opens up even more. And then the other thing that's opening is the decay time as well. And so the decay time is opening up here, which means these notes are going to like ring out even longer. So the filter cutoff and the decay time are two things that I'm automating on Basslines all the time, just to get them to kind of move and expand and change over time to kind of carry the energy forward. And that's always important, right? If you're writing high energy tunes, you always want the energy to be moving forward and things to be building and rising. When things are building and rising, that's creating the anticipation. That's creating a lot of hype. So think about that too. Okay, so it's building. Let's talk about this little fill section here that I have. So this is how the fill section. So it's a little stutter effect. All I did was I took this bass here, right here, this serum. I froze it, that's all this is up here. I duplicated it and froze it. And then I took this first little note here, and I literally manually went in here, and I chopped it up, and I would have been like, okay, if this is going to be I basically duplicated it, dragged it out by 2, duplicated it, dragged it out by 2, duplicated it, dragged it out a little more, duplicated it, dragged it out a little more. I know it's not like lining up perfectly here. And then once I did that, take a listen. Okay, so it's not enough. I move it in. Tighter. And I just kind of like played around with this until it was working for me. And I did it all manually, and I'm not even looking at the grid. All I'm trying to do is just listen to my ears and try and have it go. Right, that's all I'm doing. And I think there's a filter on it too, right? So it's gonna, and maybe the filter is here. Yeah, it is. So it also has this filter automation, so it's filtering open as well. So that's just a fun little stutter fill that you can add, and it's just built out of the same bassline sounds that we already have in our track. So that's Killing Me. Not overly complicated. It's mostly just about like automating the patch that you already got. I have some decapitator and stuff on there, but playing around with some presets that work and having them work with the track. All right, the next bassline I want to talk about is probably one of the more interesting basslines I've made, at least in the approach that I took. It's my track, The Energy. It sounds like this. So the bass line, we'll go to the intro to kind of explain it. We'll just solo it for a second. So I have this sort of like real wobbly, weird bass line. It actually all comes from this one sound. It's just an 808 sample. Sounds like this. And you could use any sort of tone. Like, don't think about like that it needs to be an 808 sample. It can sort of be any sort of long, extended, sustained tone. So what I did is I built out a bit of a pattern, and let me shut some of these off. So I built out a pattern that just goes like this. And all I'm doing there is it's pretty much all just the same note, except for one of them is pitched down. So these are all the same note. Well, it's pitched down one semitone, but they're all the same. And then this one is just pitched down, not warped, right? I want to maintain the most audio quality possible, so I didn't want to warp it, right? And the length really didn't matter. You really only need to warp stuff if the length of it matters, or you need to match it to a grid or something like that. But if you don't need to match it to a grid, sweeps or 808 tones or, even vocals sometimes, pitch it this way. Don't warp it. Just pitch it, and you'll maintain all the audio quality. So that's pretty much it. That one changes, and then it kind of just repeats, but it mostly is just kind of rocking on that F, right? So that was the initial groove that I wrote, but I added LFO tool. Nice. Ableton crashed. And we're back post crash. Okay. LFO tool is what I added next. And LFO tool is just a fun volume automation tool. So basically it's just looping. I mean, it has a filter actually too. You can automate all kinds of things, but I mostly use it for automating volume. And in this case, I created this wild sort of looping volume automation, and it's going at every half a bar. So every 2 beats, it'll do this sort of wobble. And what it sounds like is this. And I just drew this in manually. I kind of created the gate and drew it all in manually to kind of create this wobble. And I would have been playing around with this for like a while to try and get something cool. And now I have this 808 that's just a tonal do, do, do. But now it's interesting because it's bouncing along. This is like a similar effect to what we did at the very beginning with that rolling bass line, and we chopped it up. But here I've chopped it up in like a more of a syncopated pattern. Okay, so that's using an 808 to create a fun, bouncy, weird bass line, getting creative with it. Okay, next up, another sample-based bass line. It's my track Ice Age. The part that we're going to show you, it sounds like this.
Diamond chain looking like Ice Age. Been a man since MySpace.
Okay, the bass line. We'll go to the intro where it's a little clearer. Is very simple. I'll just play the kick and the bass together. So it's one note. It doesn't change at all. It's just one note. And I've just chopped up an 808 sample. Let's take a look at the sample on its own just to hear what it sounds like without any processing, just so you know what the source material is we're dealing with. Big old bass chonk. So I literally just took that, shortened it up, found a little section in the middle that I liked, and created my own little bass with that. And then just placed it here and duplicated that. And then you can see here, I just have them a little bigger. Playing around, just having them bigger. And then, almost the same here, except for this last one seems a little shorter. And that is really sort of just back and forth between those. And just EQing it. Now, these here, I've just duplicated that same sound. I've added some erosion, which is some white noise. So before, let's turn all these off so you can hear it without it. So this is just... And I have an imager on there, which is widening it up, adding some stereo image to it. And then the erosion adds some white noise. Chorus, more stereo image. More erosion. I just wanted to add some dirt, some mid-range dirt. And same with this one. This is doing the same thing. some mid-range dirt. But the bulk of everything, the clean tone, is coming from here. This one. This is where my subtone is. That's what's, carrying all the weight. All this other stuff is just adding some more texture to the whole thing. And this is what it sounds like. And that's it. It is so simple. It is so simple, but it drives the groove forward. It has a bunch of energy to it. That's it. But add the drums in. So this one's a prime example of the drums are what creates the energy. It doesn't necessarily need to be the bass line. It's the drums. The drums are what are adding hype. All right, and the last bass line I want to show you is a real weird one. It's my track Feels Like Us, and it sounds like this. And again, we're dealing with samples. I was trying to get weird with this one. The initial bass line I had built out of this kick drum. So let's actually just listen to the kick and the bass kind of together. So we have this. So apart from the kick, we have two samples that we're dealing with. We have this one, which I'll show you what it sounds like on its own without any processing. It's actually a kick sample. Here, I'll pull it out of, it kind of sounds like this. So it's a real subby techno kick almost. And so and that's all I really wanted it for, was just the sub, and just for it to kind of create some low end rumble. It has a bit of a tone, but not too much. It's mostly pretty just rumbly down there. I have it kind of rolled off these high ends, some drum bus, which is just driving it, adding some saturation, some compression, camel fat, which is, more drive and whatnot, LFO tool, which is just our side chain. And yeah, so the processing on it isn't really too crazy. And every kick is going to be completely different. That's just kind of what worked with this one. But what I want to drive home here is the inspiration that you don't always need to load up Serum or a synth and write a bass line. You can kind of get these cool grooves with just like a kick sample and just placing it in the right spots. I also have this other sample, which is just a bass pluck that I kind of just interject every once in a while. And when I'm playing this bass pluck, it's not happening when the kick's happening, right? So I basically am just going back and forth between these two sounds. The bass line itself is basically, so interesting way to approach writing bass lines, using two different samples and having them both work to create the bass sounds can also work. There are so many options, and that's basically what I wanted this video to prove, is that there are a million different ways to do this stuff. There's a million different ways to write different bass lines, and you should try and do them. Try and expand your horizons. Try to push yourself, try to write more exciting, creative music, and that is where you're going to excel. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, that's probably the reason why you feel like your music isn't getting any better. So try new things. Hopefully you picked up some tips. Hopefully you feel a little inspired. If you do, make sure to slam that subscribe. I'd appreciate it tons. You can check out a bunch of other my videos. If you're interested in signing up for one-on-one Ableton production lessons with me, you can do so at vibrancylabel.com. I'll leave a link in the description. As well, you can grab the High Octane Tech House drum kit. I'm going to be putting up a new Basslines one here soon, so maybe when you're watching this, there'll be a High Octane Basslines that you can pick up at vibrancylabel.com. Other than that, I love you guys, folks. Happy New Year. Peace, love. Let's go. All right, that's it. Okay, bye.